Hi, everyone. Good morning. How's everyone today? Good. I'm very honored to be here to celebrate the work of someone I've long admired and I feel like finally is getting the overall critical push and notoriety that she deserves from her film Christine, which is incredible if you haven't seen it. So without further ado, let me welcome to the stage Rebecca Hall. Hello. Good morning. How are you?
Very well. How are you?
I'm good.
How is everyone? It's very early. Thank you for coming.
Yes, it is. I know. I think this is the earliest event I've ever done here. So it's nice to feel fresh. So today's focus isn't so much on Christine. We'll get to that, obviously, but the sort of breadth of your work and the variety of your work, which I think is not only rare, but also worth noticing because it's not easy to be a woman in Hollywood. And you've made a lot of non-Hollywood movies, but you've also made Hollywood movies. And I think your career is emblematic of someone who tries to do a lot of different stuff, which I think is great. So the first film we're going to talk about is The Prestige, which I watched again recently. And if you're like me, I continually got The Prestige mixed up with The Illusionist for a long time. Yeah. So I wanted to make sure I was actually recalling the right film. Both are excellent.
Yeah. Still haven't seen that one.
It was like the Wyatt Earp movies. There were two Wyatt Earps at the same time. There's like some sort of strange, pattern that happens. But this is, of course, Christopher Nolan's film. And your co-stars Christian Bale and Hugh Jackman. And Christopher Nolan is so distinct in so many ways. And he's someone who's able to just exert incredible performances from actors, but also do sci-fi, do fantasy, which I think is really interesting. Ridley Scott is someone who's, I think, also been able to do that. What is Christopher like in the sense that on set, how does he work with actors that is surprising or that was maybe unexpected to you?
When I made that film, I was incredibly green. I just made a little British indie comedy called Starter for 10, which was the first film that I'd ever made. I did some work when I was 9.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. And then I sort of think of them in tandem because I wrapped that film and then went straight to LA to start work on The Prestige. And I'd got that film off an audition tape that I'd done in my bedroom on a bad DV camera. This is before you could actually film yourself on an iPhone, so I actually had to use a camera on a tripod. Anyway, so I say all this, I am answering your question because I didn't really... Take your time, this is your day.
We're here to listen to you.
I didn't really know what to expect of a quote-unquote Hollywood film. You know, people talk about making a Hollywood movie, and it always sounds like a very sort of a thing that exists in a place. It's never really like that. I mean, people now refer to me as a Hollywood actress, and I'm like, but I've lived between London and New York, and I've barely ever spent any time in LA, and films don't shoot there. So I was very kind of, I guess, intimidated, and I didn't really know what to expect, and the whole thing was I sort of went through it in a slight fugue state as a result, if I'm being completely honest with you, because I sort of turned up and it was, hello Christian Bale, very nice to meet you, and then Nolan said to me, and now we're going to do the big breakdown scene. That was my first day. It's okay if you improvise. I'm just going to rove around and improvise and just, scream at each other.
Is it scary? Is it scary to be told that you can improvise? I imagine there's a comfort.
In that particular instance, yes, terrifying. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. But it felt supported, though. I think the thing that I remember most about Christopher Nolan is that he is one of the most regimented and specific filmmakers.
You can tell from his
You
work.
can tell,
yeah.
but it's also, there is nothing superfluous. You come on set as an actor to do a scene, and he knows precisely what he needs from the scene. He knows exactly when he's going to be cutting to you, so there's no, you don't necessarily even get through a whole take of an angle because he knows when he's going to be cutting away to that. So it's like, we're just going to get those 3 lines, and now we're moving on. I mean, it is that specific. I remember not doing more than 2 takes on anything in that film.
Wow.
And he is editing it. I mean, he's already editing it while he's shooting it. It's not even just in his head. I mean, literally, he's editing it.
And did you film the whole thing here in California?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
They kept me around for 4 months, and I didn't drive at the time. So not only was I...
This is before Uber, too.
Yeah, it was before Uber. So not only was I completely out of my depth, but I didn't... I had no idea.
And
I went on the subway.
How did you settle into LA as a culture? How did you find... Did you see yourself staying here? Did you see yourself fitting in this world? Did it feel very, I guess, foreign to you in a superficial sense?
I mean, it felt quite foreign and also not. I spent some time here when I was a child because my mother used to work at the LA Opera a lot. Oh. So I'd spend a lot of time downtown. So there was a lot about it that was very familiar to me. And my father directed plays at the Armandson. And the first time that I spent any time here was when I was doing a play at the Armandson of As You Like It. And I was here for 2 months doing that, living downtown, which was very... It
was kind of undiscovered at the time.
Yeah.
We'll call it undiscovered.
Yeah, you could say. Yeah.
And that wasn't a giant movie numbers-wise, but it was certainly a big movie. Did you find yourself, you became more noticed by casting people, and did you feel like people started to see you for more traditional commercial movies, or what was the impact on your career after that?
It's an interesting question. I suppose it's always, certainly when you start out, there is a pattern of, oh, you've been in a period film, well, then suddenly every script that you get is a period film, and you're being British and in a corset. And then I did Vicky, Cristina, Barcelona, and suddenly it was like I got every rom-com, which was very sort of,
That's a tragic rom-com. That's not a rom-com.
I know, but I did. I had that sort of moment of, oh, we can turn you into that. And
you mean people notice that you could act and pretend and be something else?
Yeah, I think, yes, exactly. And I think, I suppose it's flattering because it must mean I'm doing my job well if people are convinced that that is what I am. And
right.
But I suppose if I look back on the 10 years now since that, I suppose I realize that I have made an unconscious or conscious, I'm not entirely sure, effort to, every time I feel that I'm being pigeonholed in that way, try and move away from it. And keep it varied, because I do like to explore different corridors of myself, even, one could say. It's like it's not just about the role. It's, I can play people who are very ostensibly very different to me, but at the end of the day, it's still me making the choices. So I learned something about myself by the end of it.
Interesting. And that was a perfect segue to Vicky, Cristina, which was our next movie on the schedule. So obviously Juliet Taylor does all of Woody's casting. Did she reach out to you immediately? Did you answer a call? Like, I know that process is so distinct because I've read that he just is so frightened of the casting process. He really leaves it to Juliet to work her magic.
She'd seen me in As You Like It at BAM, which I did, that my father directed actually, and I did it on and off for 2 years, that production. Changed cast, it changed, and we toured the world. And it was a wonderful experience, but I was 21.
Wow.
And we played BAM, and Juliet Taylor saw that and wanted to get me in to meet him quite soon after that. So I got the call from her saying, go and meet Woody Allen. I said, yes, of course. And it is sort of the stories that you hear about him, it was true. I turned up, he looked at me, he said, oh, hi, can you do an American accent? I said, yes, I'm half American. And he went, okay, bye. That's it.
And at that point, was the script finished? Was this character fully realized? Or
I think I had been told nothing about it.
Okay.
I mean, he trusts Juliet to that extent, that if she says this is the right person for this, then he'll take that as a given. And I think that kind of extends into his whole ethos generally. I think he really trusts actors to bring the goods. A lot of people talk about the fact that he doesn't give you anything on set. I think that's because he has sometimes a sort of extensive respect of what actors do, that he wants to just admire you from afar and let you get on with it. It doesn't always work. but it's, it's, in a strange way, it can be quite a emboldening way to work, because you know that he respects you to bring it.
And he's acted a lot himself, which probably makes sense.
But I got offered the part, and then I said, well, great, but I don't know what it is. And then they said that they would send me a script. And I remember there was a lot of, you're going to be sent the script, and it's going to come with 2 lawyers who are going to stand there, because he doesn't usually let people read the entire script, but he's letting you read the whole script. And It didn't happen like that at all. Actually, it just turned up in a brown envelope with a typewritten note that just says, you know, please read. I think you'd be great as Vicky, Woody. You know, and I thought I was going to be, you know, a sort of two-day player situation at that point. And then when I read the first voiceover and it said Vicky and Cristina spent the summer in Barcelona, I was like, hang on a minute. You know, it was a pretty exciting moment.
And what was that shoot like? How long was it? Was it all real locations? I'm trying to remember. It's been a couple of years since I've seen it, but it felt very real, like you were in real houses and really making use of the landscape and your setting.
It was all location. It was all true to. Well, you know, you shoot Barcelona for Barcelona. You'd be insane to try anything otherwise. It was great.
And how much time did you have with your co-stars to get to know each other and bond? And did you know any of them beforehand?
I knew Scarlett already because I'd made The Prestige by that point.
Right.
We had one scene together.
Right. And I was trying to remember if you had any scenes. It wasn't much, right?
We had one scene around a dinner table, and we chatted a bit then as kind of fellow actors, and then when we saw each other again on that, we were like, oh, we're playing best friends now. Hi.
Wow.
But I had a fair amount of time with her. We were all staying in the same place. There was definitely a bonding that went on between. My memory is that we shot all of the sort of American segment of the film, as it were, like all the American stuff in one half of the shooting, and then we shot all the Spanish stuff in the second half. And the Spaniards didn't turn up until the second half. So I have this memory of the first half being a lot of Americans being like, "How are you having a good time? The food's kind of salty. What are you know, like just doing a lot of chatting about the environment." And then all the Spanish people turned up and they were like, "Okay, let's go and drink."
That sounds about right.
It was great.
And in terms of the script, was there an opportunity to improv on I know he kind of goes back and forth. He's rigid at some times and not other times. What was it like on set?
He does go back and forth. It's a funny one. I don't even know if it's him so much as the iconography of his films, because I don't think it's possible to, in a weird way, to improvise in a Woody Allen film and not end up improvising Woody Allen. You know, there's a sort of
a shtick, like
even if you don't do it consciously, it sort of pervades everything. You just know what sort of film you're in, and you know the characters, and you can't help it. I mean, the first thing that he said to me when I got on set was, "Okay, here we are. Camera's over there, you're here, you can move in this kind of circle, do what you want, put it into your own words, say it how you want to say it, let's shoot." So I didn't, I just said exactly what he wrote.
But he was okay with that, it sounds.
Yeah, he was fine with that. I think by sort of day 14, I got a little bit like, oh, well, I might just put this into my own words. But it's Woody Allen, you know, he's a really good writer. It's sometimes it's futile, sometimes it's useful, that stuff, and sometimes there's no point.
And he writes great parts for women too, which is rare.
He does. Yeah. He really does.
And just being a huge fan of Javier and Penelope, like just being in their presence would just be, I don't know, they just seem so special, and they've kept such a distance from Hollywood in a lot of ways. I think at the time they probably still lived in Spain. But was it nice to kind of have this other side of filmmaking, and these people who are sort of part of the system but kind of keeping to themselves too?
I mean, I don't know. I think, you know, they were already such big stars, and we were in their country, you know, their land, and so they sort of sparkled with fairy dust. I don't know I don't know how, like, you know, they were quite magical. I just watched them and thought, wow, beautiful people.
Very beautiful people.
Yeah.
And next we move on to a very different movie, The Town, which came out in 2010, directed by Ben Affleck. And this is another movie that, you know, if you saw this being advertised in the summer, you'd be like, oh, that looks like kind of a cool crime movie. But it is actually, I think it's a very well done movie. I think kind of very underrated at the time in terms of directing too. For Ben, anyone to direct themselves is
tough.
Is very tough. How did you come to work with him, and did he seek you out, and what was that casting process like?
He did and he didn't. It was pretty similar to everything else. I think I was recommended, and then he was interested. Then he took a meeting with me, and which I remember I had to get to somewhere wherever he was, and my agent ended up paying for the airfare. I have paid her back. he met me, and then he sort of championed me. I mean, it was quite a, it was a studio film. It wasn't necessarily an easy cast at that point. I wasn't like I'd had enough, big movie experience.
Like your face was on the poster.
Yes.
And but I really do feel like that's the mark. And this is how they're going to market this movie around the world.
Yes.
And all those little, mugs of people along the bottom each serve a very distinct purpose trying to sell the movie.
Absolutely.
And so it is.
And they knew that from the beginning, that, they needed their romantic heroine, and he really championed me in that respect. Like I remember by the end of the meeting, he's like, I'm absolutely sure that you're the right person for this, and I'm going to fight to make sure you're in the movie.
Wow. And this has come up a few times in your career, but what are the benefits to being directed by an actor?
I mean, I think there's actors are necessarily collaborative, because we all have to listen to each other, and we all have to observe, and we all have to have a sense of common humanity, not to sound kind of, but that's what we do. So when an actor directs, I think that there is an ease often with that sense of best idea wins. This is a collaboration. I'm listening to everyone. We're all working. I mean, yes, it is a hierarchical structure, and like film sets are dictatorships in that sense. Like a director says the final word.
There has to be someone in charge.
But I think actors who become directors, they tend to be inclusive in that way, which I think is an important quality, because I think one of the greatest things a director can say in any medium is, I don't know. I don't trust the directors that are like, I have all the answers for everything, because you don't. You just don't. And I think that's valuable and trustworthy.
Absolutely. And again, almost similarly to what we talked about before, this was a big movie. There was a lot riding on it. I think it did fairly well at the box office. Did you find, again, then people started to shift, thinking of you in other ways then, when you were getting more kind of quote unquote studio movies and bigger blockbusters?
It was just ladies and thrillers after that.
You've had a lot of different chapters.
Do-gooders and thrillers.
Yes. And were you at this point comfortable saying no because you had worked with a lot of big people at this point, and were you still not, gosh, I still have a few more years of saying yes?
This sounds incredibly arrogant, but I've always been comfortable saying no.
That's not arrogant. That's smart. It's smart.
It's. I think that's one of the blessings of being the product of a family that are involved in this, is that I know that there is. You don't get sort of power and respect from doing anything. You've got to slightly forge what you stand for, and you've got to have principles in that respect. They don't always turn out to plan, because there's plenty of things that you can say yes to thinking they're one thing, and then they turn out to be something else.
It's also, you ultimately don't have control over how something turns out.
No, you just don't. That's the weird thing about being an actor, is you all you have is the experience. The end product is something that can be completely different.
Just make friends with the editor. That's really what everyone needs to do at the top of every production.
And the DP, and the director. Make friends with everyone. No, but I suppose that saying, and my British agent always says to me, availability is your greatest asset. And she said that to me since I started out. So she's always encouraged me to say no as well. I think it is a really important thing to be able to do.
And learn how to do it early on, too.
Yeah.
I love the movie Please Give. I loved everything Nicole
too.
Holofcener's made. I feel like in some ways she's similar to Woody Allen in the sense that she captures what we would think of sort of the banal, and there's a lot of verbiage in her movies and a lot of relationship-oriented stuff. Getting back to the director relationship with the actor, what are the distinct differences, maybe, hopefully, that you enjoy working with a woman in this capacity? Because it's unfortunately something we always have to keep talking about.
It is, and I mean, I really hope that in my lifetime we'll stop talking about it and it'll just be normal. But for as long as it isn't, we do really have to talk about it.
And she was someone who was kind of forging this path decades ago,
forever,
where very few women were in the space that she now is.
No, she's remarkable, and I think doesn't get nearly the credit that she deserves. I think she's an astonishing filmmaker.
She is.
She revels in the quiet details of life, and often that's not. you know, it's not brassy and flashy and what have you, but it's true and it stands the test of time, and her films will.
And about the relationships between women, friendships and family, and I don't think there are many filmmakers who actually tackle those.
No,
themes.
I mean, I don't like to, I don't, it's hard because I don't want to say that I loved working with her because she's a woman, or this is what's interesting about her being a woman versus a man. She's a good director.
She is, absolutely.
End of. But that said, you know, I just worked with another female director, Angela Robinson, on something, and that said, there is a thing of a female perspective. There is a thing of that, and what you choose to put in the frame and how you choose to look at the world. And I do enjoy working with that and seeing the differences. I can't really tell you what they are because it's sort of, you know, it's sort of nebulous and something kind of, I don't know, ephemeral and strange and small and slight, but you know, it's different. I mean, I think we do this to broaden perspectives, and we need all the perspectives, all of them, not just one.
And we were talking backstage about your kind of dual identity as a Brit and as an American, and you have such facility kind of gliding in and out of the accent, and I'm wondering how do you see yourself when you see yourself, you know, as an American on screen versus playing a British person?
Yes.
How do you react to that kind of duality in your life when you see it?
I mean, even when I'm playing British people, I tend to make my voice different to what it is for whatever reason, just because I like that sort of level of specificity. Can never say that word. But yeah, it's funny. It's funny because I go to England and they're like, "Oh, are you American now?" And then when I'm in America, they're like, "Oh, you're a Brit, so what's it like being here?" I've always thought of myself as being both. It's very difficult to sort of communicate that because it sort of means that I'm sort of floating somewhere between both tribes. And it's kind of, you know, but that's the thing. You know, my mother's from Michigan. You know, my mother's from real America, and my dad is, you know, a sort of country, you know, farm boy from the Suffolk. You know, it's like it's originally, you know, and so it is interesting, that duality, and I do.
So it also must help.
It.
It must help your, you know, willingness to want to jump into different.
I think it helps in a lot of ways.
minds.
I think it helps me have a perspective on both cultures. You know, that is sort of unique. Like I can see things about American culture and how to be American or whatever that is informed by England and vice versa. Although right now, both countries. Anyway.
I know, we were saying she can't even go back home and, you know, cuddle up.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on. You mentioned earlier that you were being seen as the woman in thrillers. And I watched The Gift the other day. I hadn't seen it. And I have to say, this movie really deserves a lot more attention than it got. Not only is it really just beautifully written and directed, it is really scary. Yeah. in a way that's not so jump out of your seat scary, but sort of what this, I won't ruin it if you haven't seen it, but sort of what bullying does to a culture. And then your character, which, you know, in any other movie could have just been reduced to the wife who discovers the secret, and every step of the way I was like, okay, Joel, come on, don't do that. And then every time I thought it was going to go that direction, he's surprised. And I thought, probably as an actor reading the script, you were just thrilled at the end to just see that, wow, she's the hero.
I was, but you know, he was very, he's brilliant, and I don't say this to take away from anything that he wrote that, but also he was very open in the sense that he said to me, "You're a lady, I'm not. Talk to me about this role. Talk to me about the problems with it. Talk to me about where we can make this." You know, and I lent on him pretty heavy because I thought actually what this film is really about is, you know, is misogyny, is bully. It's like quiet bullying. It's quiet bullying in places that you don't see, internal bullying within a marriage, and places that you aren't aware of it, and how much women internalize how much women internalize abuse and don't see that that their voice is being taken away from them. And I was like, if you can make a film about that, then you're onto something, because that's real.
And what was did he have a specific inspiration for I mean, aside from, you know, the countless inspirations that exist, did he have a personal
No,
something happened to him?
He had. I mean, he did have. He had. It was more of an idea. Like he thought, what if the people that you knew in high school come back, and then it kind of built from there. That sort of sense of.
And we so often see too the couple who moves into the pretty house, and I've just seen the story so many times, and it was so thrilling just as a viewer
to have that inverted.
And it reminded me so much of the end of Seven.
Right.
Where Jason's watching the TV and Brad takes the lid off the box, and it was like, oh my God, this is the end, and there's no hope. Yeah. And that's really, and that actually I watched it this week, so that felt, resonant, in a lot of ways. But it also it wasn't afraid to be ugly. Yeah. Because I think Jason's character represents this. Yes. No matter how attractive he is or successful.
Yeah, he looks like the perfect situation and everything, the perfect couple, and he's so lovely and charming. It's hidden. It's hidden.
And so did you see again the swell of thriller offers, The Conjuring 5 or wherever we are in that series?
I did see a swell of it's funny how when people don't actually watch a film and just consider it in terms of the headlines of what it is or the advertising or something, it gets reduced into something else. And that film, I think, was quite easy to reduce it into.
The poster is very strange.
Film, and I'm a victimized wife that horrible things happen to. So I did suddenly start seeing a bunch of those roles. And I was like, I am not, no. No,
I've come too far for this.
That's not what I'm doing.
What it really is, has anyone seen it? It's really surprising. Can't say enough about it. So then we come to probably the most important film for this year is Christine, which I saw at Sundance in one of those unspoiled, circumstances where I didn't really know that much about it. I read the little blurb in the book, so I certainly knew the ending, but it was such a, I don't know, I walked out of there just really, I felt changed for having seen it. And I know you've talked about how you were afraid to dive into this project, and rightfully so. But what specifically most scared you about trying to tell this story? Because telling the life of a real life person is always scary, but to have an end to this person's life that was so tragic, I'm sure was very difficult to wrap your mind around.
I don't know that it was specifically that about the ending that scared me. It was more the sense that I knew that the reason to make this film was to reclaim her symbolically, like what she means, which of course you cannot divorce from the thing that she did. But you can stop sort of fetishizing and sensationalizing that moment and instead think about what it means and what led to it and the life behind it, and humanizing her and taking her out of that realm. So I think the thing that frightened me was not being able to do that. was because it was such a fine line, and this was in the filmmaking too. It's not just me, this is really an Antonio Campos who really did it in such a brilliant way, I think. I mean, I just think it's an extraordinary piece of filmmaking. I do, regardless of me being in it or not. It's like, it is. Regardless of me trying to sell tickets. I do think that. Is that there is such a fine line between, that could have tipped over into sensationalism or some sort of glorifying or some sort of, to find sympathy, to show how close we all are, potentially, to someone who did something so shocking, so violent, so far away from us. To bring you close to that and make you feel sympathy for that, whilst at the same time acknowledging that she is unknowable, that we can't know everything about her, that we can't reduce her into, oh, she did it because of this, or oh, she did it because of that, or, that was really frightening to me, like to get that, to nail that, and to be on that tightrope. And I really think we achieved it, which is why I'm, I have endless reserves of pride for this film.
As you should. And did you actually have the chance to speak to anyone who knew her?
No, I didn't. I have since. It's funny, actually.
What have people told you about your portrayal?
Well, there was one in particular that's been very moving. I didn't speak to anyone at the time, partially because Antonio and Craig said, it's not necessary. And Craig had done all the research and he'd spoken to her co-workers and friends.
This is the screenwriter.
That's the screenwriter, sorry. And and he wanted to keep it a workplace drama, so he spoke to the people that he wanted the information from. But also I understood that I didn't want to either, because I knew that everything that I would really want to know about her would have come from her. And when I have played real people in the past, I have spent time with them and spoken to them. And that wasn't an option in this case. And the people that surrounded her and the people who knew her and the people who were close to that trauma for them, I felt I would end up having an allegiance to their memory, their version, their story, and not an allegiance to the art and the script that we had carefully constructed and worked hard to create. So that was my, that was my logic, and I really believe that. And also, I don't know, all through the making of this film, there was this dance of maintaining respect, sensitivity for this person who existed, but also not wanting to indulge in some sort of like emo darkness about it. I don't want to go home and be like, I'm so tortured by it. It's like I was really trying hard not to do that. Yeah. Because if playing her taught me anything, it was that I've got to live.
Right.
And sorry, I get emotional.
It's okay.
And I finally, at the premiere in LA, I got a tap on the shoulder, and I turned around and there was this guy who just said to me, he looked at me and he said, I'm Smitty. And I was like, I don't know who that is. And he was like, I was 21, I was an intern, I was her best friend. Wow. And he cut the trailer for the film.
He did?
Yeah. I mean, Craig Shilowich, who's the writer, who looked everywhere for this one guy because he knew that he was going to have something substantial to say about her and couldn't find him. And then when we made the film, this guy, Smitty, approached us and said, I own a trailer company, I want to cut this trailer because I was her best friend. And I've seen the film, and it's wonderful. It's her, and thank you.
Wow.
But anyway, when I turned around in LA, he said to me, I haven't spoken about it for 30 years. I left and I didn't know how to deal with this thing that happened to me, and thank you, because now I have a way of processing it. And that's the best validation.
That's incredible.
All.
That's why we do this, or why you do it. I just watch. When you're watching yourself on screen, are there particular things that you are critical of yourself? Last night I asked Bryce Dallas Howard and Matthew McConaughey and Edgar Ramirez this, and Bryce said, I notice how nasally my voice is. People pick apart, I'm sure, certain things. Is there something about your own performances that bothers you, or are you able to watch yourself objectively and try to just take it piece by piece and not be overly critical? Which I know is very hard. Very hard.
It's hard. I mean, I am pretty, there's always that feeling of like, oh, I missed a trick. Oh, I could have done that. Oh, why didn't I? Well, or I did that. Why didn't they cut to that?
Or they just didn't include the scene.
Yeah. But I don't know. I've got to a point where, I think in my early 20s I used to do a lot of, I can't look. It's too painful. I can't take it. And I just got to a point where I'm like, it wasn't just me that made this film. It was a lot of people, and there's and there's a collaborative effort, and there is a thing that has been made from a bunch of people, and to respect that and honor it, I feel like I've got to divorce all of my feelings of whatever and just watch it and go, well done, everyone. Yeah.
Smart. So we have a pretty fair amount of audience questions. Oops, I want to get to them. This is a nice question from Anonymous. I don't know why, this is a good question. How has your father influenced your work? You hinted at that earlier. And what specifically have you learned from him?
I'm gonna kick off again for this question because he's not very well and hasn't been for a long time. He gave me so much, and I think I'm only really beginning to understand that now. Because for a while it was such a danger zone for me, because in England, I think there's a lot of, understandably in many ways, it's like, nepotism and this and that, and entitlement, and you've got a silver spoon, and it was easy for you, and all the rest of it. And so it was this sort of loaded area every time that he offered me a job. I'd be like, no, I want to make it on my own. I've got to be seen on my own. I've got to be distinctive, and I can't do this thing. And, it was there was a lot of struggle, which was kind of ridiculous, because every time that we did work together, it was great, because we always had this very straightforward relationship. You know, he wasn't, I had a very kind of, you know, divided, strange childhood in many ways. You know, my parents divorced when I was 5, so it wasn't like he was there the whole time. And I could reclaim some of that time in a weird way by having this relationship with him, which was of course about work, but was also about the fact that he was my dad and he was proud of me, and that was a thing, you know. And so he gave me these years of doing repertory theatre in his company, where I didn't just work with him, I worked with all sorts of directors, and I would do, you know, 4 or 5 plays in a season. I remember doing one day where we would do 3 plays in one day. You know, 3 different roles, 3 very different sort of characters. And, you know, that was my drama school in many ways. I didn't go to drama school. I went to university, I went to Cambridge and did that for 2 years and then left. But you know, I had that experience, and I think the kind of experience you get from doing theatre as an actor is invaluable. I don't say this because, like, okay, theatre is better and you should carry on doing theatre for the rest of your life and it's a better art form. I don't believe that. Like, I love film and I love film acting. That for me is actually where I've chosen to go more often than not. But I think for what it teaches you about storytelling and, you know, working in a community and respecting the people on stage with you and giving them things, because no actor exists in a vacuum. I think that's really important, and every actor should have that. And I think when you go straight into TV or whatever, you can get stuck in a lot of traps that are difficult to get rid of.
Right.
So I think my dad gave me that. I also think he gave me something which I think about a lot in regards to Christine, actually. And it makes me sad that he won't see it. He said to me once, don't ever be, I was playing a role on stage that was quote unquote unlikable. She was a difficult lady. And I think I was resisting it on some level because I was worried that it wouldn't be seen as successful if an audience didn't walk away loving her. And that's not a way to think as an actor. That's absolutely not the way to think. And I remember my dad just said to me, don't ever be afraid to play crazy. Don't ever. Because you could just trust that you've got enough humanity that it'll be all right. And that's something that I thought a lot about with Christine.
Well, and it's so interesting when you watch Christine, you experience the same sort of alienation that the people around her feel about her.
Yeah.
But then at the end, they learn in this most cruel way that she was so much more than they thought. And it does teach us to, just because someone may seem a little off or a little odd, we don't know what's going on with them.
No, we don't know what's going on with them.
And you know, some people really do have actual mental health problems, and it's a good lesson. And maybe just try to help that person, especially if you're in a professional capacity.
Yeah, I mean,
so.
I think that Christine is fascinating because it holds these 2 contradictory experiences for the viewer, is that you sort of feel distant, but
it's hard to watch. It's not a fun experience necessarily, but in the end,
but I think
you appreciate it.
I think it's exhilarating.
It is.
I mean, that seems like an odd word, but it's not, you know, there are films that are very kind of, you know, it's a slog. It feels like work and you can't, like, and I feel Christine is, I think it's a similar misconception about depression, that depressed people don't laugh, or they don't, you know, they can't, they're not active. Right. And the thing I always find fascinating about Christine is that she is active. Every day is a fight to survive, to avoid doing that thing.
Right.
And as an audience member, yes, it's uncomfortable, but also, you know, I'm being convoluted, but hear me out for 1 second, I might get there in the end. You know, I think about this sort of, you know, and I think about this because it's something that the film deals with. Tabloid journalism, the impetus of tabloid journalism is in a way to take things which are horrifying and give the reader this sort of illusion of intimacy whilst simultaneously showing the distance between you and that thing. Like, they're a monster, they're over there, they're evil, they're this, they're that, and you can kind of go, oh, it's not like me. You know, and I think the film does something extraordinary because it talks about that, and at the same time it collapses that distance and says, I know she's different, I know she's complicated, but also, how similar are all of we? In the sense of we all know what it's like to have a rough day at work, and we all know what it's like to get depressed. And, you know, the things that separate Christine from us not being able to carry on are kind of arbitrary. Brain chemistry, social time and place, gender.
Right.
It's, you know, it's all, and to actually feel that and see that and understand that and sympathize with that, I think is a real achievement. Whilst also showing the, you know.
It's a very relevant story for our times, that's for sure.
Yeah.
This is from Logan, and Logan wants to know, what was a turning point for you when you were able to understand how the business works? So I think what Logan's trying to say is probably the mechanics of the industry, the kind of dealing with agents and managers and the ugly businessy things that actors generally, you know, don't have the training that they may need going into all of this.
Yeah, you know the curtain in The Wizard of Oz? It's just a bit like that. But it doesn't like whoosh, and then you're like, oh, now I know how it works, it's fine. It's like a little bit, oh no, a little bit more. And then you're like, it's an ongoing discovery.
Have you found that having representation in England and also a team in America has helped you? Does one kind of act as, you know, more of a kind of a buffer, you know, or more protective?
Yes, I suppose so. I mean, I don't have a manager like a lot of people do, but I think my English agent probably operates like my manager. I think English agents on the whole tend to be more
it's a very different business
hands-on. But weirdly, my agents at WME, I'm very fortunate because they're very protective and hands-on with me too. So I just lucked out. I don't know. I think it helps to have representation in both because I don't want to feel like I've left one, you know. So it's kind of it's helpful from that perspective. But I mean, who knows? So much of this stuff is
trial by fire.
Yeah.
And Laura would like to know. I can't wait for you to have an answer to this. To what do you attribute your success? Because you're very modest. But are there any tips that you can give the people in this room because most people in this room are attempting this hard work that you do? And
I would have imagined, yeah. What do I attribute my success?
And you are successful, just so you know. We're telling you that. You're not saying that about yourself.
Yeah.
Your father obviously laid good foundation for you.
Yeah.
In terms of the quality that you've sought out.
I mean, you know, a lot of it is being in the right place at the right time, and I'm very lucky in that I was always going to be in the right place at the right time with the family that I was born into. I see that, but it's a combination of that and then hard work, because you can't let anything go, and it doesn't matter how much talent you have. You've still got to do the work. I really believe that. Like my dad would often say to me, you've got this, you know, you've got a little, talent is like a little nugget, and it's really kind of fragile, and you've got to look after it really gently, but then once you've sort of made the fortress of cotton wool, then you make a fortress of steel, and then iron, and then you lock it and you put a padlock on it, and whatever you can do to protect that and your integrity and just make that, just be true to that. And hard work.
Do you have aspirations to moving forward, creating your own content and writing and directing, and be more on the opposite side?
Yeah, I've written things my whole life. I don't think of it so much as something that I do to put out into the world, as much as like my way of navigating life. It's something that I've always done. I'm sort of getting to the point now where I'm like, well, you know, those screenplays that I've got in a drawer, maybe I should do something with them. And I do want to direct. It's like right now it's like looking at a huge mountain that I'm a little way off climbing, but I really want to do it.
Well, and the guys who make Christine, and I don't know how much you know about their company, but they are such a great model for partnerships and how they switch off producing and writing and directing. And I would love to see a model for more women doing that as well, because
I think we've all got to help each other. This is you know, and I really felt I just finished this job in Boston. Professor Marston and the Wonder Women, about the invention of the Wonder Woman comics, and it was directed by a woman, written by a woman, produced by a woman. You know, there were a lot of women, and and I really felt for the first time in my life, actually, like a kind of a community of women wanting to help other women to create and do things. And I think that's really important, actually, if we're going to make a change. And also, you know, the guys help the women too. I'm not saying it's an exclusive club.
No.
It would be nice if everyone helped everyone.
And those guys too, especially have been Sean, and you know, he did Martha, Marcy, May, Marlene. I mean, their films are very inclusive.
Oh yeah, they are. They really
and
are.
James White too is incredible.
I love that film.
This is another anonymous. You sort of hinted at this earlier, but this is a question I had as well. How did you prepare for Christine in terms of her accent and mannerisms? And your voice sounds very different in the movie, and I know you're doing an American accent, but it sounds lower. It
was in a completely different register, actually.
Was that difficult to maintain?
Yes. It took the film shot in 29 days, which is nothing. It was a tiny budget.
What was the budget?
I think it was under 3. It was, and not under 2. It was somewhere between 2 and 3. You know, 29 days to shoot, but my preparation for it was 3 months, and it was a very sort of intense 3 months and hard work to get the voice and the physicality and everything.
Did you work with a coach?
No.
Or just on your own? Okay.
I didn't. I don't not work with a coach out of some sort of, you know, I'm above it. I think it's really good to work with coaches, but sometimes the sort of idiosyncrasies and mistakes that can happen for me are valuable. You know, because I think people actually speak like themselves. Yes, they speak like where they're from, but also they speak, how people speak, I think, says something about their emotions. And I think when you find a character's voice, you find it from emotion more than you do from it. So you start with externals, you start with an impression, sure. I had 15 minutes of her, which I ripped the audio file off the video that I had. It was just her doing an interview. It's all that's available. And I listened to it obsessively, and it started off as an impersonation, but then you have to think about what are my instincts about what this person is feeling and who they are, and also what they want to project to the world versus what they're feeling inside. And if you imagine yourself in that kind of like, what's it like to be someone who is so frightened of feeling like she's wrong, of feeling like everyone is seeing that she's wrong, of feeling that they don't fit in, what happens to your voice when you feel that? When you really feel that, it gets constricted, it gets stuck, and that's when a choice that you make about an external choice that you make about physicality or vocal anything, that's when it becomes internalized, is when you link it to that. That's when it sits down somewhere deeper. Because, you know, it was 3 months, and I think the first month I was just walking around doing the voice. It sounded like how it sounded, but it didn't sound lived in, it didn't sound real. And then, you know, by month 2, I'm like, oh no, now I'm beginning to feel this person. I'm not putting on anything. Then hopefully by the time you get on set, you're not doing anything. You're just being. I mean, that's the goal. And that's why I do all the prep beforehand, because the goal is that you turn up to set on day 1 and you don't make choices anymore.
You're not making adjustments when you get to set.
You know, people talk about choices, and yes, of course, acting is making choices, but you don't, when they say action, you don't make any choices, you just are.
Also makes your director's job much easier when he or she's not having to ask you to make. Those are big changes if they're saying, can you, modulate your voice? And
no, and Antonio and I spoke throughout that whole process. You know, I'd be sending him audio clips. I'd be like, what about this? And how does she look? And we talked so long about costume and makeup. We went through a whole sort of thing about, you know, maybe we should have a slight prosthetic because her nose was very and then it was like, no, that's ridiculous. Why on earth? You don't need to affect that from the outside. Also, you don't want to reduce it down to like, oh, I'm trying to make myself look hideous or something. It's like, that's not what the film's about. You can act that stuff. You can act discomfort. You can in a weird way, you can act ugly. It's like, it's a state of mind, that's not, and she wasn't ugly, P.S. That's not what I mean by that. Yeah, but so it's detailed work. But that's what I mean. I mean, I'm a stickler for that. I like to do my prep. I like to have spent the time and read the books that I feel are relevant, done the things that I feel are relevant. I also always make a chart. I've not really spoken about this, but it might be useful to actors, because obviously you always film out of context, and it's kind of a nightmare, and you're trying to hold the whole thing in your head the whole time. So what I end up doing on every job is getting a large, A2 or whatever piece of paper, and then I'll write the scene number that I'm in, and then I'll write some kind of indication of where I am emotionally at the top of the scene. Whatever it is, whether it's a sort of poetical rendering of some kind of feeling, or whether it's what the scene's about, or some sort of action, or whatever it is, then I'll do an arrow, and then the next one, and again, whatever state I am in at the top of the scene of that one, and then an arrow until there's this whole sort of spider web. But it's great, because you just pin it up on your trailer or whatever, and then you look at it, and you're like, oh, we're filming scene 72 today. Okay, what happened directly prior to that, and where do I get to directly after that? And you can kind of track it. And also when you're doing it, you get to know the script very well, and also you can also begin to tell when things don't track logically, which is something that does happen, and I think it's our duty as actors to point them out, because sometimes the writers, more concerned with exposition or getting something else across, and it is our job to be like, hang on a minute, that doesn't logically add up.
So don't be afraid to speak up in those.
No, I think that's, you do it respectfully, of course. I have all the respect for writers. They do not get enough respect in Hollywood. So often on film sets, it's like, oh, this scene's not working. I know, we'll just cut it. No, because actually sometimes as an actor, that's where the real juicy stuff happens. If there's something that you feel you can't make sense of, get in there, work out, where is a way that I could make this work? And if after all that you really can't make it work, then say there's something missing here logically. It doesn't add up, but
And when did you film the tragic scene where she does what she does in the scope of that shoot? Was it at the end, or did you have to do it in the middle and then recover from that?
No, it was
I can't imagine what that would have been.
It was the last day. It was my last day. They'd actually shot the sort of end chunk of the film in sequence. So.
Oh, they did. Okay.
So they had 2 days after I left where they were doing the stuff with Jean. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I could. There was any other way to have done that. It had to be at the end, and because after you've done that scene, she's sort of, she left me a little bit.
Yeah. What was it like to recover from just being in her skin for all those months?
I tried so hard not to take it home with me. And as the shoot went on, the kind of whatever thin membrane that I was trying to protect between it, it did get hard. It got hard, and there were. I don't really know how to describe. There were. Because her voice was so different, and I don't know how much like the real Christine I was, but I created a real Christine of my imagination and what I had to go on, and Craig Shilowitz's imagination and Antonio's imagination. She became very real to me, and I would hear her voice. There was no other way to put it. It was hard, and she would be hard on me. She'd be like, "You could be working harder. Work harder, do better." I found myself going a little crazy at times and waking up in the middle of the night being like, "Christine, I'm doing my best, I promise. Just leave me alone so I can. No. Which sounds completely crazy.
No,
but
it
it's
doesn't.
true.
No. It sounds like what was required to do her
justice.
Yeah,
so it was hard. And when it got to that day of filming that, it was painful for all of us because we'd done our job right. Nobody wanted her to do it.
Right.
And we all knew what was coming, and we didn't want it to be true. In the same way that when you watch it, you get to that point and you don't want, even though you know it's happening, you don't want her to do it.
You keep hoping for a different ending.
And that was what it was like on set. I walked out there to do that scene, and I was all rigged up, and there was a silence. There was a silence, and I think that there's all this chat about actors staying in character all the time, and it can be somehow. On occasion it can be something other than useful for the material. And I don't always do it, but on this one I basically did, because it was too difficult to shift the voice and shift everything else. And so the moment that the hair and the makeup and everything else were on, I was her. So for better or worse, the crew got to know Christine more than they got to know me. And there was a sort of strange fear and also respect for her, and also affection for her by the end of it. So there was this very respectful silence. And also the fact that we all knew that this was something that really happened. And we had humanized her. She wasn't just a story. She wasn't just a news piece that was shocking, and she'd become a person to us. So it was incredibly difficult.
I'm sure.
And on a really basic physical level, you know, when you hold a fake gun to your head, your body actually doesn't know. Like, if you're doing your job well as an actor, you've convinced yourself that it's real. So your adrenaline goes bananas. Yeah. So my memory was doing it, and we only did it once. We couldn't really afford to do it more than that. We did some sections of it twice, but the main shot that's used, we only did once. And so when it was done, I just remember leaving, and I couldn't, you know, I had this sort of detritus of makeup and everything on me, and I couldn't stop shaking. It was and I knew that was the adrenaline of that. It was a very strange thing. But in many ways, she was easier to let go of at the end of the process than other characters that don't have a full conclusion.
Right.
In a strange, right. I know that sounds weird, but you know, I said goodbye to her in a very finite way. So, you know, I could walk away from it, pretty much. Still gets to me, but now I feel, you know, I just feel sympathy for her, for the real one.
And so many people know her story now that in a way that she was maybe just a Wikipedia page before, and now she's a real person.
Yeah, I don't think that's for nothing. I think people get kind of, you know, there's a sort of, I don't want to go so far as say ick factor, but there's a kind of ambivalence around it. It's like, are we allowed to be happy that this film exists? And I look at it and I think, not only does it mean so much for our culture, for our media, how we choose to disseminate information, tell people things, which is very relevant right now, sensationalism, all the rest of it, but also this is a woman who really desperately wanted to be famous for doing good, you know, and there's this sort of culture of managing the self, you know, whether it's taking a selfie or editing it or changing it, like how are we putting out into the world who we are? And here is someone back in 1974 who is desperately like cutting and re-editing and retrying her life to do the best possible, and so terrified that what she is not going to be accepted.
She was very prescient in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I mean, just.
But you know, I just think she was someone who wanted to be famous for doing good, and she ended up getting famous for blood and guts. And
I think she was railing against at work.
Of course.
Right.
But now, I don't know, now the film exists, I can't help feeling there's a chance that she gets known again for the conversation that she produces, for the things that we will come out of the cinema talking about: mental health issues, suicide, the media, women in a workplace, expectations of women in positions of power. I mean, all of those things, like that will be the conversation that surrounds her now more than the thing, and I think that is valid.
It's huge. Well, we thank you so much for all your work and your generosity.
Thank you.